So don't pay attention to this empty seat. My name is I'm the head of Snob Project. We have a very interesting panel discussion. Even though it is a panel discussion, quite an official one, I do hope that it's going to have the atmosphere of free and very pleasant discussion. So the era of post-branding, we love to work with post-branding era, the current strategies of promotion of the cities. I know that you see on the slide we have a different speaker because Ekaterina Pronicheva didn't manage to join us, so we're going to have the deputy, Ms. Shashavitskaya. She's been late a little bit, so this is the head CEO for the Committee of Tourism in Moscow. We have Lutz Leisering, director of Berlin Club Commission, Nicholas Ho, the founder and director of Digital Tourism Think Tank, Alexander Elizasser. You all know him well. He's the founder of Heart of Moscow. Anna Melikan, the producer, and Sergei Chopan, the partner of Architectural Bureau of Speech. Since I have great privilege to moderate this roundtable, I'm going to tell you what we're going to talk about today. Moscow Urban Forum has been held many years, and we're talking about branding of areas, branding of cities. And why do we need this branding at all? We don't understand that the image and the cultural peculiarities of the cities become the image of the city itself. And they help economic growth, attracting tourists, allow the residents to draw their attention to the city, to like the city. The residents do not always like their cities. We need to understand which kind of tools should be used in order to shape right and a very effective image of the cities. What is this effective image of the city and what effects do we aim at? What tools should we use to promote the cities? I'd like to give the floor to Sergei Choban. So you have interesting ideas to share. Let me ask you the question, which is clear and important. The point is that you're representative of architectural agency, which is very important for our country and globally, and we do understand that the image of the city is determined by big skyscrapers. Empire State Building in New York, for instance, Doge Palace in Venice. So what do we have in Moscow? Only the Cathedral of Vasily Blazheny, or there are any other interesting landmarks or which can be used to describe the image of the city? We need to understand what is happening with the architectural heritage. How will we reconsider this heritage? How do we work with this heritage? What effects it brings? Can we reshape this heritage? One of the key interesting cases which I would like to elaborate on, and from my perspective is going to be the most understandable and useful, this is the monument to the Peter the Great. We have the monument to the Peter the Great, which is hated by the residents. We have special passion for hatred for this monument. But the tourists do attend this monument. They look at the monument, they spend great time, and they feel kind of attachment to this story. How can we separate or combine this love and hatred and to understand what represents visual landmark of the city? Thank you for the floor. It's not quite a simple question as you put it. We can reshape and repackage the heritage, that's for sure. We can do that. But to be serious, one of the most important features of the city, it's visual attractiveness. I was an artist before. I liked to draw cities before, and I still think that architecturally those cities are good which are liked to be drawn, or you want to associate yourself with the city. This is not about the quality of architecture, but the scale of architecture. Skyscraper is more difficult to be drawn and to take photo of if you want to see the person and the surface under this skyscraper. density plays a very important role as well. But of course, the visual attractiveness of the city, from my perspective, determines the importance for the tourist. I follow the Instagram with different names of the buildings, and some of them are becoming interesting for the people. There are many photos taken of these buildings. They do recommend each other to take photos of different buildings. In St. Petersburg, there is a specific space which is popular among the who take photos. There is something in that space which is going to attract people. Of course, the visual attractiveness of the cities comes with the time. In St. Petersburg, for instance, the church on the Krovy was an awful image, but now it is painted on many calendars even. Talking about the monument to the Peter the Great, so architecturally it's not quite understandable thing. It is quite controversial. This is the monument which has its own attractiveness. If we're talking about assembly of Patriarchy Prudy, we would be surprised, but one of the buildings which is going to be images of Patriarch. I don't like this building, but it's good to be demonstrated as it's unique. And there was the mention of Morozov was on this list. This is quite a controversial building, but it has its own energy for creativity, sometimes wild, untamed creativity, but it leads to people liking different buildings. Some things are dying out because the energy is totally consumed, but overall I think that it is very important to appeal to yourself, to our city developers. You need to think about the image of the city. What is going to happen if you develop this house or construct this house near to this house, or if you construct a tower to what is already in place? How it is going to change the body of the city, whether it is going to be more visually attractive or interesting for drawers. This is the most important thing from my perspective. I'd like to clarify one point. So out of today's existing facilities and sites, what can be regarded as a city visual landmark? I'd like to apply to Anna Milikan, distinguished producer. I've seen many movies of hers. I'm trying to find something. In most cases, I'm quite disappointed, but Anna belongs to those producers which I like. I see what they're shooting as a movie image. I like when my house is selected. Usually it is a mention of my friend, his house, of Mr. Plotkin. I have also one site where only officials or military people live. But it's a favorite place to shoot. I see what is shot and existing architecture. Moscow city is the landmark. I don't like how the city looks like and its self-criticism and criticism itself. Within the city of Moscow, there is a lack of meaning of the city. So when the Moscow city was designed, there was an idea of a public space. The public space was eliminated. There is a mall right now inside. What is the main thing about the skyscraper? Is kind of feeling of space around, from which you can see the skyscraper and to understand what you are regarding to this skyscraper. So this was stolen from the people when they put a trading mall inside, which was supposed to be a square, a plaza, to comprehend all these towers. And now all these towers are big. You cannot have a lower tower when the neighboring tower is big. And this is not the picture of the city. It is economic result, but it's not a picture of the city. I'd like to comment on that. That, it's quite windy, and nobody thought that that was quite a windy place. It's not comfortable to walk there, but it's beautiful, yes. So the image is okay. There is a problem connected with the wind when you build the skyscraper, but it is windy since there's just a full building on the first floors. Therefore, there were special wind corridors and drafts are the place. So if you enter the public space, there is no wind. When you go to the Tower of Empire, you see all these corridors. There is a wind because of the mistakes, because there is no big public space in place. Tatiana Shashevitska, I'm very happy to welcome you. Thank you for joining us. I'd like you to tell us about the strategy of the city, how we understand branding of the city right now, what we base on, and what we're going to work with. From your perspective, personally for you, how is it relevant? Good afternoon, dear colleagues. I'm very happy for your time. Even regardless of the great weather, you have attended our roundtable panel discussion to discuss what Moscow is. I'm sure that you have your favorite spot in Moscow, what you like most of all in Moscow. But nevertheless, everybody can agree to the fact that Moscow right now is a leading city in Russia, is a kind of entering gate to Russia, is a window shop of Russia, which demonstrates the best image. And the main thing, it gives great emotion. And the emotion which we have, being Muscovites, is the feeling of being proud. We used to like it as it was, but now there are many advantages. And figures prove that this strategy which is being implemented is successful. This strategy has been in place for 10 years. I'd like to start my general presentation with a saying by Churchill that Moscow is a puzzle wrapped in a secret. This phrase can be a key, since Moscow can demonstrate different, unique places, unique things, which are interesting for a modern tourist, since the world has changed. And together with the change in Moscow, the stereotype of tourism behavioral pattern has changed. What he can get in a particular spot he arrives at. If we remember what it was important before, it was very important in terms of planning to buy a tourist package trip, using the bus in a group of tourists. But the current trend says that it is quite modern to make a fast decision about your trip. And the unique thing about this is to find yourself deep inside the environment. Communication with the residents, to attend local places where the locals spend their time, to attend the festivals. This is a full penetration in the environment. And to live the life of those residents of the city. And Moscow gives such a result. It demonstrates that it is absolutely possible. There are some constraints for our Western tourists connected with visa regime. I'm going to say how it was done during the World Cup. So last year, that was a good solution. If I might have a clicker, it would be perfect. %72% want to spend their money not on different things or just on getting emotions. This is the foundation of the strategy we developed, what should be provided by the city. The involvement in the city. You shouldn't entertain these people. You need to involve in this cultural context, the historical context, and to demonstrate involvement in common life cycle. This is a global trend. Over 50% of the whole tourist traffic is about individual tourists, which is quite relevant as of today. The slide about stereotypes, how we are perceived abroad. And it's interesting to me, what is the leading point, how we are perceived and seen by our Western tourists? You can just voice this stereotype. Far, yeah, we are far. Expensive, I'm not sure. Not safe, I'm not sure about that as well. The first social survey, this is not safe. That's what people say. Such a stereotype exists. It hasn't been changed, so this is a task we try to solve, to tell that Moscow is a leader in terms of the safety among all the cities. As you remember, last year, within 24 hours, the case on the picture robbery from Tretyakov Gallery was investigated and the case was solved. So that, with the involvement of city security and safety systems, the second stereotype is that it is expensive. We have some data that 4-star, 5-star hotels are 2 times cheaper compared with Western Europe. So for Western tourists, this is even cheap. Everyone can find a hotel or restaurant based on the level he would prefer. When it comes to the stereotype that Russia is far, more than 3 hours it takes for Western Europe to fly from their countries to Russia, from Asian country. This is a transit point. The main thing that we would like to send a message is to bust all these major stereotypes. World Cup became a special event to bust these stereotypes. The main thing what World Cup brought, it demonstrated the Muscovites how the city can look like. It may be hospitable, it may be friendly. We all remember with warmth in our souls. We didn't want it to be over. That's which is a driver for the development of the city. We do understand that this event tourism is a major driver to attract tourists to the city. I believe that the figures are self-explaining. If you look at the statistics, the tourists and visitors during the World Cup were 3-fold bigger than those who bought the tickets. It means that the people went to our country for the emotions. They spent their time in fan zones, in the clubs, in the bars. They attended museums. For them it was a great prerequisite to attend Moscow and to see the city which has changed.
And on this slide, I'm just trying to show a comparison in prices. You can see the prices for a metro ticket in Berlin and in Moscow. Well, Moscow is much cheaper. What about this last thing that you have on the slide. You say a dinner for two with wine in Paris is say 4,000 rubles, and you say that Moscow is cheaper by 80%. Well, we understand with metro tickets, but I'm not sure that it's quite right about a dinner for two with wine. It's important. We'll talk about it later. I think it's quite more expensive than usual. I think that everybody is going to agree that Moscow has a lot of things to see. And I think just like a lot of European cities, Moscow ranks at the top when it comes to museums, art galleries, different exhibitions. We all remember the queues to Louis Vuitton fund to see the Shukin collection, and that is a big event for Moscow. Moscow has a lot of different exhibitions, and I think all of us probably have all of these exhibitions in our calendar. We do attend them, and I think the fact that we have so many exhibitions, that is a very important attraction for any city. And my last slides. Last week we got news from Singapore that 2 Moscow restaurants ended up in the world's 50 best restaurants list, and Moscow can be a destination for gastronomic tourism. Not only do we have high-end restaurants, but we also have lots of food courts. We have places to eat out and parks. A lot of Soviet farmers' markets have been turned into very hip places with wonderful food courts. Moscow has very diverse architecture. I think everybody can agree that Moscow has buildings from different centuries, buildings of different styles. Sometimes these styles might even seem a little bit haphazard, but I think this is something that is very specific to Moscow. Moscow doesn't have one style, but I think that is what makes Moscow special. We have a lot of architectural diversity and sometimes you see things that wouldn't be next to each other in any other cities. Moscow is also in the top 3 of locations to be Instagrammed, according to Instagram. Bloggers and tourists, they give Moscow very positive feedback, and that has been confirmed. It is important for us that Moscow is in the top 3 most Instagrammable cities, because, you know, today pictures are much more important than words, and Moscow gives a wonderful backdrop for Instagramming, one of the best locations to visit. And we understand that Moscow is finally gaining recognition as a tourist attraction. What it is that we are trying to do to overcome all of these stereotypes? Well, we are trying to come forward with a very quality offer for tourist companies and for different travel offices. We organized several tourist expos in Asia, in Seoul and in Beijing. Our booth was ranked as #1 when it came to its architectural concept. We go on road shows, we take part in business meetings, we talk to official tourism offices, and we are going to relaunch our Moscow web portal that is going to allow to plan a traveling route based on what people prefer. I believe that when it comes to e-services, that is probably one of the top priorities for the development of tourism in any city. E-services allow people to find something that they might want to see in a specific city, and that is something that will allow them to plan an individual trip without contacting travel agencies. Another thing that I wanted to mention is that we are not trying to beautify Moscow for tourists. Moscow is opening new parks, it's improving new areas, not so much for the tourists, but for the locals. And I think when we are trying to improve the city for the locals, that is something that, in the end, attracts a lot of tourists. We improve the quality of services for the locals, and then these services can be enjoyed by all our visitors. I think that was the last slide. I think that for Nicholas and what I would like to point out that this monument that you see is the monument to Peter the Great. I do hope that every one of you is going to have a little bit of time to take a stroll through Moscow to look at Zaryadye Park. Zaryadye Park is a destination which has become sort of a postcard for Moscow. Zaryadye attracts a lot of tourists, and because we opened the park here, you can have a new looking point at a lot of the Moscow attractions. And I do believe that a Moscow Urban Forum will give us a platform to exchange our knowledge and opinions. So thank you very much. I want to ask you one question on this slide, and on the previous slide, you showed us that the city is quite actively promoting itself abroad. But on the other hand, you're also saying that we're not catering exclusively to tourists, but we are improving the city for the locals, so that Moscow becomes the standard for the entire country. So this digital project that you talked about on the previous slide, so what is this project Discover Moscow that we saw on your slide? Well, it is in English, but not exclusively in English. We also have it in Chinese. I think that's almost half of our visitors are from China, so we have it in English, in Chinese, in Russian, of course. And so, yeah, we have a multi-language version of this Discover Moscow project. I think that is something that will make it easy, literally for anybody, to find whatever they want to see in Moscow. Well, thank you very much. So because we just talked about the digital part, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Nicholas Hall. And Nicholas is the CEO of Digital Tourism Think Tank. Nicholas has a wonderful, extremely visually beautiful presentation and very beautiful slides to illustrate how to create an attractive image of the city and how a city can work with social media, with visual content. And I'm really interested to know, because I work in the media, I would like to know what sort of audiences are you trying to engage? What are the key audiences for you?
Great. Thank you very much. It's a great honor to be here in Moscow at the Moscow Urban Forum. It's my first time attending. I have a lot of content to share, so I'm going to kick straight off. And I'm going to start, first of all, with a series of quotes, which we've collected over the years, which I think illustrate some of the changes we're seeing.
Travelers are changing, their needs are evolving. A lot of them are wanting to understand what the destination offers, the authentic side of things.
It's both travel changing and the digital infrastructure. So we have to stay ahead of the game, and we have to always try to pilot different things and work in different ways.
Travelers are all kinds of people. All kinds of people have all kinds of interests and therefore find their inspiration all kinds of places.
One of the biggest shifts in the recent years with content has been that we've had to become comfortable moving very quickly and changing frequently.
We want to be one step ahead and make sure we shape our future tourism activities for the benefit of the society, our guests, and with respect for our nature and culture.
We are in a literal sea of sameness. Consumers don't know how to tell your destination apart from your competitive set because we're all kind of marketing the same things.
Your brand means nothing unless somebody relevant hears about it.
It's about telling the right stories on the right moments to the right audiences.
Okay, so that's just a few quotes that we've been collecting at the Digital Tourism Think Tank over the years. We have a lot of speakers sharing all of their great insights on what they're doing in destination marketing. And you may recognize one person who has already been speaking here who was in there. I think what I want to get to the essence of is that branding a destination today is about understanding what is core to the destination's identity. It's actually going far, far beyond attractions. It's going beyond building monuments. Of course, this idea that we can build it and they will come works as well. You see that with destinations like Dubai. But destinations that are really leading the game here, they're getting right to the root of what is the core values that are driving their destination. And this is what I want to focus on today, and you'll see how those values translate themselves in a digital world. We see destinations that are really succeeding with branding in a digital world. First of all, starting with what is our identity? What are we about? Is it about our unique way of life? Is it about being a city that promotes tolerance? Is it about being in harmony with nature? What is it that is core to our product and to our experience? And if you look at this full funnel diagram, if you like this as a marketing funnel with all the key elements in, right at the top there, you've got the product, the brands, the partners, and the people. These are the key elements which make up a brand. Before you can create any marketing, any branding, any visuals which support that, you need to understand and actually work with all of those key stakeholders and key actors in a city that make up the economy and the livability of that city. And so that's really, really important to focus right at the top there. First of all, I'm going to cover this in 5 key points and 5 key shifts that we're seeing in the so-called post-branding era, as it's been said. So first of all, there has been a big shift in how we look at our potential visitors. We've always looked at them as demographic sets, as segments, but now there's a much greater understanding that we need to understand the complexity of the human race, if you like, that we need to get a deep understanding of those psychographic drivers, that much more detailed aspects behind the decisions that people make. We can't just put people into a bucket and label them all as the same. And in a globalized, digitalized world, we follow tribes and communities in online spaces, and we're no longer divided by those borders that we see on those old maps that define us in the past. I want to start with a quote from Shuling Lee from Singapore Tourism, who has recently led a brand redesign project, and she really explains a little bit about how they see their destination going forward. Oh, the sound is down, not to worry. We'll move forwards. So I want you to think about the destination as a diamond, okay? Diamonds, anybody who's bought a diamond to propose to their fiancé or wife will understand that you look for 4 things, the 4 C's: the clarity, how clear is your message; the color, how engaging is that when you translate that into content; the cut, in terms of how defined you are at speaking to the right audience; and the carrot. Ultimately, we always assume that social would give us lots and lots of value for free, but we're also in a world where the reality is you have to also invest to reach the right audiences. And that brings me to the second point. We have moved as destinations from doing 1 or 2 big campaigns each year, to marketing in moments, to engaging with people in all those millions of micro moments that exist throughout every day. We're all mobile consumers connected all the time, and that means a completely different way of engaging with people. It means moving towards a range of different content types which help bring out those different aspects of the destination, creating a story of niches and perspectives and being the curators of that story. This is an example of what Visit Norway have just recently done. It's just one story about one woman's life and how much she loves the city of Oslo. It's rich, it's immersive, it's engaging. And you know, it's very different from what we might traditionally put out there as a story promoting a city. It's about how much she loves to live in that city. Here we have a great example, on the other hand, of an ambassador, Samira Wiley, who's a very famous sort of celebrity, and she's been working with Instagram and with the city of Toronto to show her side to the city. It's all about that local perspective.
What's up, guys? Samira Wiley here, hanging out in Toronto.
And as you can see,
this has really become my second home. I work here about half the year. Come on, I'm going to show you every place you need to go.
It's about finding storytellers who can tell their story in new formats, in new mediums, in different ways. Here we see Copenhagen working with publishers that are working with their own audiences, which are very, very, very niche and very defined, and actually become better storytellers than the destination themselves. So why not work with them? The third point is we've moved from attracting visitors and trying to grow tourism, and anybody who is familiar with UNWTO's predictions for the growth in tourism will know that we're going to see 1 billion tourists and this huge increase, to dispersing tourists and actually ensuring that the value of tourism is seen not just in the city centers and by the key leaders of the tourism industry, but by residents and populations who don't currently see the value or benefits in tourism. And this has created somewhat of a backlash. So we talk now a lot about the age of over-tourism. We see that a lot of people are rejecting tourism. And the simple message takeaway is you have to love your visitors and you have to make them love you. The city of Bruges, the mayor recently said he's going to restrict the number of tourists. I'm not sure that was with consultation with the tourist board. I'm not sure that's a good thing, to be completely honest. But if you don't manage tourism well, you see a rejection of tourism. You see a rejection of new platforms which have disrupted things like Airbnb that has, well, certainly caused controversy. But if you embrace that change, here is a session that I took part in where Airbnb said, well, we can be part of the solution as well. We can spread people outside of Barcelona to discover new places like Igualada, which is just in Catalonia, and it's not a very big tourism place, because new platforms actually help discover and create new experiences. But here we see an example of Paris, which have done exactly that through brilliant content and storytelling, showing hidden night spots in Paris, getting people outside of all of those tourism hotspots, and also recognizing that today's visitor has matured and they actually don't want to see the Eiffel Tower. Perhaps they're happy with it being just in the background. The fourth point is we move from seeing places to experiencing places. We don't want to anymore do tick box tourism. We want to create a truly transformative experience when we travel, and we want to really understand what it feels like to be part of that city. I think the most extreme example that I could find was New Orleans, that have created a concept where they have these biker chicks who show a completely different side to the city. They created this content series through Instagram, and it's all about seeing New Orleans through their perspective. Now, I'm sure if you pick up Lonely Planet, that is not the New Orleans that you're going to see. We see that the economy is also driving that. So Airbnb Experiences is probably the best example of a platform which is changing how we travel. And this is an example of Moscow. There are hundreds of really authentic experiences which are about taking something away for myself. So maybe that's learning to cook traditional food or doing something with art. If we look into mobility, we see huge changes there as well. I was just really impressed by how the park has been landscaped here and how I remember it just a few years ago. We're seeing cities move away from cars towards new forms of mobility, and those are creating new tourism experiences. Which brings me to my last point. We've got to move away from making statements which are empty to making real actions which deliver. We've got to embrace and support and promote a new kind of leadership, a leadership leadership which gets your hands dirty, which enables you to actually get down to the root of the problems and the opportunities. We've got to be bold, and we've got to recognize that some aspects of tourism are broken and we need to change the direction of travel. We've got to be conscious of the challenges we have in the world today. So here is an example of Helsinki marketing. The CEO of Helsinki, Laura Aalto, is one of these great leaders of European cities that I would say, and she's led an initiative to really promote sustainability amongst all the tourism operators and get them really working on changing the experience. Another example, Oslo. They have an ambition to be a car-free city. It was actually rejected by the population after initially being accepted, but they still got around it by removing all the parking spaces. So there are ways to manage the experience of a city. And we see micromobility taking over there. And the very last point here is that if we look outside of tourism, this conversation is happening elsewhere. The Prime Minister of New Zealand recently spoke about how they want to go beyond looking only at GDP as a factor to measure their success as an economy. They have to look at the value that they create for all the citizens. They have to look beyond just the revenue that they generate. So I hope that gives lots of food for thought. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to discussing some of those points.
Thank you very much. I'm going to have one question. I'm very interested in the following thing. How do city and administrations of the city listen to your recommendations, particularly in terms of which we can call work with bloggers, or, for example, understanding unique tourist routes, which seem fascinating to us being individual tourists. And from the perspective of administration of the cities, it seems to be awful. We have bad conditions, it's not safe, it's not secure. Do not show this and do not tell about this. How often do you hear such words from the administration of the cities?
What I would say when it comes to these opportunities that the custodians of the city's brand have, it's important to approach it, first of all, with the right attitude. It's important to understand the value of design in the process and co-design, working with other people to co-create and to co-design new experiences. So if you look at experience design, that is something that is best done together with the city, with the residents, population in the city, and with visitors as well. You can go through a co-creation process to do that. But just as relevant, where you have challenges, issues to do with perception, it's important to bring those people who have those negative perceptions into that and actually look at how you can solve that with their input and to make them part of the process. When people are part of the process, there's a much greater sense of ownership, and you can work through a much more iterative process of understanding, ideating, testing, defining, prototyping, and learning from those iterations as you go along.
I cannot but ask this question. Nevertheless, how often do you hear to negative response the following phrase? Yes, they have been bought. They have their own interests. This is the most common phrase when we see in social networks negative attitude. There is one of the hypotheses from the official authorities that this is a bought, paid-for blogger, and they follow somebody else's interests and don't listen to them.
Authenticity has always been at the root of strong destination brands. Long before digital, authenticity was what drove people to discover destinations, and it's been at the heart of messaging around the destinations. When it comes to working with influencers and bloggers, they can really dovetail the great work that the city can do in crafting and shaping an image of the destination. They can support that, they can validate that, but it's important to give a lot of creative freedom. It's important to show, but allow them to tell their own story in the way that is most authentic for their audience. And where there's a commercial relationship, transparency is the best way to embrace that, to explain that, you know, you've invited them over, they're paid for their time, and they're paid to tell a great story through their own eyes and through their own words. So I think good leadership is about being very pluralistic and being very open and being very transparent. And if you do that, even if you make mistakes along the way, you will have the support of people and you'll be successful with that.
Абсолютно согласна. Спасибо.
I totally agree with you. Thank you very much for your input. We have great story of Lutz Leisering, who is going to tell us about how Berlin, the global club capital of club culture, used this experience and how through the club culture you can work with a brand. How not the most popular official or state input can reverse the city towards super attractiveness for the tourists.
Much for inviting me as well. I'm a frequent traveler to Russia, so I'm aware of how the city of Moscow, but also I've been to Kazan and to St. Petersburg, and know that every city has their own identity. I think my previous colleagues here on the panel said a very interesting things, and I totally would agree. We recently did a study on club culture in Berlin, and it turned out that about 30% of tourists come because of music and nightlife to the city. They spend around 1.5 billion euro in the scene, but also in the daily retail stores and culture offers. But the big question for me is, how can we turn a tourist from being a guest, somebody who looks at things, to a participant? And I don't think you can actually manage this in a top-down way. To organize the fragmented scene, the creative people in the city is nothing you can organize by, by a top-down strategy. So the question is, how can we motivate to be part of this process, as you were talking about? And you were talking about, Chairwoman Borensheva, you talked about emotions. I would talk about the vibe. What is the vibe? What is the cultural vibrancy? And how can we keep it and provide it? And from my experience, I think you have to have the recipe, and you have to have three components. As you have to have a community, people who think unconventionally, are creative, are shapers of the city, the makers and shapers of the city. You have to have the right framework conditions. It's about funding, it's about rules and regulations, which are hopefully not as strict. It's about public transportation, but also you have to have accessible and affordable space, because you can only experience and create new things, new trends, go different ways if you also don't have the high risk of paying high rents. So I think we have to look at the creative footprint of a city, and that's actually what we did. We measured the creative footprint of Berlin, of New York. Right now we're doing this in Tokyo, because we think the question of the space is relevant for the future cities. And for me, I mean, we're talking about experiences, we're talking about engaging with the audience, but when we look in inner cities, they're still dominated by Starbucks, by the same retail brands. Inner cities look the same pretty much everywhere. So the people who are actually shaping this city and creating the city are not really heard. In Berlin, we also have the whole struggle between real estate development, people who are in their spaces creating something. Many of them don't really have a long-term contract. And I think, as also from the perspective of tourism, we have to reach out to them and create prototypes, create funding systems, listen to them, and give them a platform. And I would think the most impactful are disciplines like music, literature, performing art, visual art, and we have to look out, where are these people? Do they have enough resources? Do they need help? How can we support them? And create an atmosphere of collaboration in a city. And then you can start to market them, but not the other way around.
So, one very tiny question to you, so you didn't want to talk about the club culture in specific. Nevertheless, we have a slogan, Moscow never sleeps. This is the absolute well-known story. We have 24/7 city. We have one of the most powerful, great techno platform in Moscow, connected with electronic music. But I'm interested in the following thing. Let me brief. The city and the administration of the city should search for these points of attraction or feeling that something is emerging. They need to follow these trends and somehow promote the cities. Or you can give the initiative for the self-development and not touch it at all.
I agree, and I would say Berlin did a lot of good things because they didn't touch, they didn't do too much. The administration was in many ways supportive by not doing anything, by not regulating anything. The more freedom you have in a creative space, the more innovations and the more outcome you're probably gonna have. And it's not easy to understand because people in the administration usually don't have this access to what are these actually doing, in dark rooms, downstairs in basements, loud music, litter, noise. There is a lot of negativity coming with it, but a lot of great experiences. And I think to find a balance in the city is something which also Berlin has to find out in the next years. How can we keep it in the balance? How can we not lose all these protected spaces, freedom spaces, whatever you want to call them? And I think it's also very important to understand that club culture or music culture has also 3 dimensions. We have an aesthetic, a cultural dimension. We have a monetary dimension. Of course, there's money being made. But it also has a social dimension. And when we talk about engaging with tourists, we also have to talk about how can they engage in the social life of the people and be part of this. The best thing is, the easiest way is to dance with them. So I think the more you open up, the more you provide local, authentic experiences, the more you get people involved in the whole process who are already doing very interesting and amazing things in the city. I think the better outcome you will have, which you don't even have to promote anymore because it will promote itself.
Thank you very much. Dear friends, we have about 10 minutes and 2 greatest speakers which made great work for our city. Alexander, one brief question to you. Everyone knows the heart of Moscow. Everyone have these badges. Everybody has these polos. So 2 questions actually. Do we need to use the political images to promote the city? Today, I've come just back from Krasnodar and I saw magnificent brand in Sochi as well. These are the T-shirts with Putin, with Stalin, with the Soviet symbols, with Cheburashka, with Gena Crocodile. Everything we have from Putin to bears going to have these prints on the T-shirts, but you have chosen a different path. So do we need to use political or these cultural symbols in souvenirs? And the second question, just brief, what should we utilize to a bigger extent? What can be used as a symbol of the city on souvenirs? Let me start with the political part. I talked much in different interviews that we have chosen the following path. So we decided to step away from any political things. We don't use serpent mallet, the star symbol but the perception of these symbols, of particularly hammer and sickle, is not perceived quite appropriately. We decided to smooth our way through. We decided to step aside. And now, we're not participating in any political election campaigns or so on and so forth. The only political character we used in our souvenirs is Mr. Yeltsin. When we prepared souvenirs about the 90s, but this is the gun time, so there is nothing contradicting to our concept in this approach. Globally understand that there is a huge demand, very often participating in different exhibitions, festivals. We have people who ask for souvenirs with Putin image. We say that we don't have, and we're giggling at that inside, but we do not follow this request. What about underutilized symbols? What can be used as a symbol of the city? If we're talking about kind of unification, a clear, big audience of Europe, what else would you use as a symbol of a city, to use it as a landmark image of the city? It's difficult to say what else, because we have worked out all the possible topics and issues. The issue of Russian space is perceived quite appropriately and well. The exploration of space by Soviet times and Russian avant-garde. Prior to this discussion, I said that we are developing this brand in Europe, the brand dedicated to metal signals. So these are the symbols of space, of Russian avant-garde. There is a huge demand for that. We sell these symbols in Grand Palais in Paris, in the Museum of Germany, National Museum of Germany in Amsterdam. It has a positive response. This dog named Laika, it's perceived quite well by our foreign friends, and we can promote this inside the city as it has a very good response. So thank you very much for your input, Anna. You are the holder of Mayor Award for developing the image of the city in the movie. Frankly speaking, from my perspective, it is the most effective way to tell people about the cities. We all remember short movies and full-length movies dedicated to these cities, to these stories about these cities or happening in the cities. Usually the name of the movie have these names. Everybody knows what city is talked about. Being a producer of such a creative industry, particularly cinema, how is it to work with the city, particularly with Moscow, since the scope of our interest is our beloved city? Do you require any additional support? Or, you know, when you shoot a movie, you just block the streets. You need to have houses without any people inside. How should Moscow assist, or any city assist? And how is it comfortable to work in Moscow, being a producer?
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting me here. I work in a completely different field, so it was very interesting for me to listen to you. Of course, when it comes to shooting a movie in Moscow, it is a very complex thing. But, of course, a movie can bring in visitors and people. We don't know how many, because that is something that is very difficult to calculate. But usually when we watch a movie about a certain city, we feel like visiting it. So how can we make a movie to visit a city. Should the government sort of tell me to make a movie about the city? I don't think that is going to work, because we have to have a creative impulse and a creative impulse to make a really cool movie. If somebody watches a cool movie, they want to visit a city. People people in Russia didn't even know about Bruges in Belgium. But once they made the movie, all of a sudden tourism in Bruges exploded. And I personally know people who visited Bruges because they really wanted to see it. So they never advertised Bruges as a tourist destination. They just saw a cool movie that was set in Bruges. So I think a movie can really promote a city. But when it comes to Moscow, it is really difficult to shoot a movie in Moscow. It's very expensive. Therefore, a lot of filmmakers get out of Moscow, and we recreate in Moscow. We do a whole Moscow set in other destination because, it's just easier. And in Moscow, people are not surprised to see a film crew shooting a movie. On the contrary, people are frustrated and annoyed by filmmakers. We love watching movies, but we hate filmmakers closing off streets in our city. How do we change this attitude? Honestly, I don't know. But when it comes to Moscow, Moscow is providing a lot of support. They give us free parking. We can shoot for free in parks in the metro or in various official buildings, government buildings. And if such initiatives are broadened, then people will shoot films in Moscow more and more. Question: I would like to understand, do you think that a city can come with you with a budget to make a movie about it? Let's say Voronezh or Tula, right? Tula is like a wonderful ornate gift box, right? They come to you with a bag of money and they say, make a movie about us. Well, theoretically, I think it can happen, but honestly, personally, I don't really believe it's going to be successful. I know that the rebate system has been launched in Russia. And what it means is that if you make a movie in a certain location in Russia, you get a rebate from the government for part of your budget. And so filmmakers are loving it. So if we go to Voronezh and if Voronezh gives us a rebate, then I think it might work. But again, I don't really believe it. I think that a creative drive is something that comes from within. This is like a love story. You can't force it. Thank you very much. I would like to thank all of the participants of our discussion today. I think if you have more questions, you can approach our speakers. And, we run out of time. But to conclude, I just want to say that we should approach everything with love. We can find common ground with cities. It's great when cities create a lot of opportunities for creative people. I think creative people bring a lot of opportunities and then contribute the most to a brand of any city. And when it comes to rebranding, I think that's going to go on for some time for Moscow.
Здравствуйте.